If you're doing nothing and then you start doing anything for about the first 9 months, your body's going to adapt and get great results. Most of those adaptations are neurological to begin with. Then around month 9 through 12, people start plateauing. And sometimes they just look like a smaller version of their original self.
Welcome back to another episode of the Peak Performance Life podcast. Today, I'm very excited to have a special guest speaking about a topic that we have not yet covered here on this podcast. We have Dr. Erik Korem, a high-performance pioneer who introduced sports science and athlete tracking technologies to collegiate and professional football teams. He's worked with the National Football League, Power 5 NCAA programs, gold medal Olympians, Nike, and the United States Department of Defense. He's an expert in sleep and stress resilience, which we'll talk about here today. He helped pioneer the use of athlete wearables and sports science during his 16 years working in the NFL, college football, and with Olympic champions. So while wearables have become the hot new thing, he has been an expert in this for well over a decade. So excited to hear about his knowledge in that category as well. Erik saw firsthand how optimized health and performance could be achieved when data was turned into personalized recommendations. So he's set to bring out these same elite capabilities to anyone motivated to improving their well-being. He's developed a passion for solving the data to action gap, wearable tech, and mHealth space. And he became the founder and CEO of AIM7, which is an app that provides customized exercise and wellness recommendations to help prevent burnout, excess fatigue, and to promote rapid and sustainable fitness gains. Dr. Erik Korem, thank you so much for being with us here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm a little embarrassed from that bio. I need to shorten it down.
No, it's great though, man. It's really, really good stuff. Really impressive resume. You've obviously worked with elite athletes, and we're all grateful that you're now bringing this work to the masses.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. I'm really passionate about taking the lessons that we learned and bringing it to everyday folks like you and me, right? That just want to feel better, be our best for our family, our loved ones, and really for ourselves.
Yep, absolutely. Well, let's start with a brief background before we get into some of the real meat of the concepts that you cover and things that you're doing. But yeah, give us maybe a brief background of how you started using wearables and just kind of like your progression over the years.
Yeah, so I grew up in Dallas, was a college football player, and was very fortunate when I started my coaching career. I was at the University of Arkansas and got to start working with some of the best sprinters in the world at that time. Several that were in the Jamaican system, including Veronica Campbell-Brown. She was an 8-time Olympic medalist, won several gold medals. And I was blessed to start traveling the world with them and to see how other countries were developing athletes. And what I noticed was, if you go to places like Australia, which is big by landmass, small by population, they were just crushing it at the time in like Olympic medal count. Didn't make sense to me. And then I started doing some research and found out that it wasn't always the story. In the 70s, they were just getting their teeth kicked in. They were like 58th in the world or something. And they were like, enough is enough. And so they started something called the Australian Institute of Sport, where they would bring the best in exercise physiology, biomechanics, psychology, and technology together. And from the time I think that the AIS opened up in the late 80s until 2000, so like 12 years, they went from the 50s to number 3 in the world in medal count. And this process has been duplicated in other countries. And so as I saw this, I was like, I started learning about this field of sports science and high performance, which are two different things. And I was like, I want to bring this to America. So I saw my window of opportunity in 2010. I was at Florida State University as the speed coordinator for football. And I got promoted into a position where I had some really good influence on the organization. And I asked the head coach, will you name me the director of sports science? He's like, yeah, whatever, call yourself whatever you want. So I went to Australia and was with an Australian rules football team for a month, embedded in the organization. And I brought back a suitcase of these athlete tracking devices. They weren't available in the States yet. I mean, I guess you could buy them, but nobody was using them. And we were attaching these devices to the pads of our players, which connected to GPS satellites, and where we were able to measure everything that was happening on the field And then we were able to, after about 18 months, turn that data into actionable recommendations to improve performance and reduce injuries. We had an 88% reduction in injuries. Our team won a championship, the Orange Bowl, and then the NFL flew in and they're like, what the heck is going on here? So it opened a multi-billion-dollar market for sports wearables. And as a matter of fact, if you just watch the Super Bowl, there's like AWS Next Gen Stats, and every one of those players is now tracked live in games through chips that are in their shoulder pads using RFI technology. So I was very fortunate to kind of be at the tip of the spear on that, and then went on to get a doctorate degree studying sleep and stress resilience. And that's kind of where I went down this rabbit hole of adaptive capacity.
Amazing. That's really good stuff. I have a lot of questions and I want to get into the stress and adaptive capacity too. But I'm curious too. And I watch soccer and I always see that they wear like these kind of like, I'm like, why are they wearing these like bras? Like,
Bros,
is it, yeah, I'm like, what's going on? What is
the
that?
man's ear.
And I heard recently that those are wearables, right? Those are tracking something.
That's the company. Yeah. So that it's probably Catapult Sports. And there's a small device. Well, now it's small. It used to be really big. And it sits around like around the thoracic vertebrae area, probably around T6, and kind of center of mass type of space. So the sports bra holds it in place. And on football players now, if you watch college games, you'll typically see a little hump around the middle back of the pad, and that's where the Catapult device now slots right in. And so, yeah, European soccer and Australian rules football was way ahead of the game. And yeah, these devices connect to GPS satellites. So if they're outside, you can get speed. There's accelerometers in there for acceleration, deceleration, gyroscopes, and magnetometers. So you can understand what direction they're facing, how many times they make micro movements to the right or to the left. You can calculate something called player load. There's all sorts of amazing data you can get out of it.
Yeah, I was curious, what are some of the main things that you're looking for when you're tracking these athletes, and what are some recommendations like that came out of it? Like, here, this person can improve on this based on, X data.
Yeah, great question. So the first thing we had to do was actually model the game. So nobody had ever really said, this is what the game of football is. It was like, oh, we're just going to go train. And everybody would train exactly the same in the offseason from quarterback to lineman. No, makes no sense. It takes a casual observer to go, that's not right. But what we did was we could say, okay, a receiver that plays core four special teams, they may cover 8,000 yards in a game. And of that, they cover, I don't know, 600 to 700 high speed yards and X amount of yards that are in these certain acceleration bands, where a lineman may cover 5,000 and they may only sprint 80 yards in an entire game, of which is like from the sideline to the field. So linemen don't need to be doing all this crazy sprint work. Most of their game is played in like a very small area with high accelerations, and actually they're kind of wrestling their opponent. So we could look at like also heart rate data. So we had heart rate straps on the players, and we could look at what energy systems are predominantly being used during the game or what zones they're in. And then we could reverse engineer that and say, well, if a game looks like this, then we need to train the players for each position to match those demands. And then we need to monitor and develop practice plans that don't overcook these players. So for instance, for years, day 7 to day 10 of training camp in college and the NFL, everybody's dropping like flies. Why? Because you've overdone it. Tissues can't hold on. Now the NFL has so much data that there are like every team has a formula on to how to load players and all this kind of stuff. And so we were able to say, okay, let's build better practice plans. Let's build better training programs. And then we mix that with other early warning detection systems that we were building to be like, oh, this athlete is looks like their adductor, their strength is going down. We get into the athletic training staff. They do some soft tissue work. Then we'd be like, hey, coach, so-and-so we believe is at a risk for injury today. Let's lower their reps in practice. And our roster was stacked, like no doubt about it. Every player on our offense got drafted. But the
Wow.
year before, we underperformed, won 9 games. We had a great coaching staff, great players. We just built a system that allowed them to be their absolute best when it mattered most.
Amazing. That is very, very cool. Yeah, and I know you talk about now a lot about this stress resiliency and adaptive capacity. Also saw your article that you had put out about, this whole wake up and grind 5 a.m. workouts and how it's probably hurting people more than it's helping people. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I guess we can start with the adaptive capacity piece. So the data or the technology I was just describing measures something called external load, what you do. So as a sports scientist, there's two things we want to know. We want to know what you did, and then we want to know how you responded to it. And we can measure response, biological adaptation to stress, or how the body's coping with stress by looking at things like what's your resting heart rate the next morning? What did your HRV do? Your perception of your well-being, how you feel, which these devices do not capture, which is a critical part of this process, which we built into AIM-7, because these devices are actually a lagging indicator of how you're adapting to stress. There's probably days. Do you use a device?
Yeah, I have the 8 sleep now, so I'm pretty much using that. Yeah.
Does it give you a readiness score, or do you use a Aura ring or anything?
I used to wear Aura for a while. Now the 8 sleep does my cooling and tells me HRV, my breath rate per minute,
Yeah.
and the heartbeat per heartbeat, resting heart rate, I guess, while I'm sleeping and all that kind of stuff.
Well, some of the folks listening here may use some of these devices. And listen, I have an Aura ring. I think it's a great device, but sometimes like they have these readiness scores and it's like, you're a 90 today. And you're like, no, I feel like garbage.
Right.
It's because the device doesn't know how you feel. So you want to know what the person did and how they responded to it. And what we found was with elite athletes, you could load them up with tremendous amounts of physical and psychological stress, and their bodies would bounce back and adapt really fast. Because the stress systems are it's a general grouping of systems. There's the HPA axis, the autonomic nervous system, there's an immunological response. And whether I'm doing stressful exercise or you and I are in a stressful engagement, like a conversation, these systems turn on and they act exactly the same. Okay. So the good thing about that is there's things that we can do to better adapt to it. So we would find that athletes, the best, they would just get crushed and they come back exactly the same the next day. And then we started doing this actually with some unique military groups, and we found the exact same thing. So I'm like, how do we build this capacity for more stress so you can take on more with less cost? So
Mm.
my doctoral degree was in understanding how sleep impacts our ability to adapt to stress. But in general, I was like, how can I build this capability into anyone? So that's what's called adaptive capacity. And there's really 5 key pillars for how you do this. And these pillars are based on the literature, are directly related to longevity as well and your ability to be more resilient. So that's what we studied. Then we would build systems to help athletes become more adaptable to stress, because if you can adapt more to stress, you can practice more and get better at your skill. If you and I can adapt better to stress, that means we can pursue very difficult things and not burn out. When life gets crazy, because it's going to, unpredictable things happen, they don't just completely rock our world. We have the capability to adapt, adjust, and continue to move forward. Because I think that's what everybody really wants, is to be their best, even when things get difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I there's a great book. I recommended it a couple times on this podcast, and I always tell people about it when stress comes up. It's called The Upside of Stress.
Yeah, Kelly
And
McGonigal.
love the book. I think it
Yeah,
probably added years to my life because it reframed the way I look. Oh, wait, stress actually can be a good thing, right? Exercise is actually self-induced stress, like you just said,
yeah.
right? And so how do we increase this adaptive capacity for stress, I think is a phenomenal question. Whether someone is listening right now who is thinking to themselves, oh, I got to get back to working out, but every time they do, they go too hard. and then they burn themselves out or they get
Mm,
hurt, or whether they're someone who's maybe, kind of further along like myself, who also is like, how can I, if I want to make gains now, I gotta do higher level of stress or higher level of work in many cases, right? And so how do I build myself up to that? So what are some of the or what advice maybe would you have to someone who's maybe in that situation? They want to get back into working out more, but
mm,
they just feel like every time they do, maybe they're going too hard or they're burning out, or
mm.
what are some steps that you would take there?
These are all great. By the way, Kelly came on my podcast, The Blueprint. She is phenomenal and she's working on a new book. You should get all of her books and then you
Yeah,
should have her on your show. She's amazing. Love
I'd
the
love to.
work she's doing. She's such a positive person. So first of all, there's kind of a general biological principle. You're either adapting to stress or you're maladapting and getting sick, injured, or ultimately you die. That's how we die, right? We can no longer adapt to stress and our bodies just give out. The formula is pretty simple: the right dose of stress and the right dose of rest, and you're going to adapt and grow. Okay. But there's 5 things that kind of undergird this: there's sleep, there's exercise, there's mental fitness, there's nutrition, and healthy relationships. All of these things work in concert, and there's what's called crossover adaptations, meaning when you physically exercise, you can also become generally more psychologically resilient. In the specific case of exercise, there's some general rules of thumb. Number one, you shouldn't increase your exercise volume more than 15 to 20% per week. So if we're doing 100 minutes of walking, like the next week, just don't do more than 120 minutes. What happens at the new year is people are like, I've been working out once a week. Now I'm going to go 5. And after 3 weeks, they get hurt or they're burnt out, right? They've
Yep.
overcooked it. So I'm from Texas, and the best piece of meat and the hardest piece of meat to barbecue or really smoke is a brisket. I mean, there are places that people travel 5-6 hours to get their brisket. And if it takes 10 to 12 hours to cook one of these things, right? And even then, it may not be perfect. But if you come over to my house and I make a brisket and I put it in the microwave, you're going to be like, gee, thanks. It's going to be chewy. It's going to be disgusting. And you'll probably never come over again. And so if you microwave the situation, you're going to get a microwave product. So one of the key things that a colleague of mine, Dr. Chris Morris, developed a number of years ago is, and we've kind of morphed this into what we call a fluid and flexible model, meaning in like an AIM 7, we actually baked this into the system because what we found with elite athletes was if you adjust their training daily to how much stress they can handle, they got significantly better results. I'm talking like 50 to 500% more improvement in different categories like aerobic capacity, peak vertical power, lean body mass, etc. Because if you try to cram a square peg in a round hole, meaning like if your body's exhausted, and you're like, oh, I'm going to still go do this crazy hit class, like you're going to be more exhausted the next day or you may injure yourself. So the first thing is don't increase your training volume or exercise volume more than 15, max 20% per week. And if you've been going for a long period of time, 10 is kind of the ceiling. You're going to get hurt. Number 2 is it's ideal to adjust your exercise daily based off of how much stress you can handle. And some days it's like, remember, there's 5 pillars for how you can build capacity. So like, let's say you wake up and you're like, man, I'm just really worn out today. Instead of going and doing that really hard workout plan, maybe you go and get 10,000 steps in and you take 10 minutes for yourself to go do some breath work and just to be out in nature. Guess what? Now you're refilling things up. So I should have told you this earlier, but the way I like to think of adaptive capacity, it's like the gas tank in your car. You could have sorry if you have a Tesla or whatever, that's just, you could think of it as a battery, whatever. But
Mm-hmm.
if I have a truck, I'm in Texan, right? So if I were to drive my truck from here to California, as long as it's in working order, I'm going to get from point A to point B. But if I have a small gas tank, like 2-gallon gas tank, I'm going to have to stop all the time, refuel, or else I'm going to get stuck in the desert somewhere, right? Now let's say I have a 30-gallon tank. I have a massive tank for fuel and I can just go. Building adaptive capacity is like building a bigger tank. But every day you're going to wake up with a different amount of fuel in the tank, adaptation fuel. So we actually, in our app, we actually can assess those things. But just, you got to think like there's 5 ways I can build capacity. It's, I can be investing in these different things, and I don't need to beat myself up when I didn't get that really hard workout in, but maybe I engaged with some friends. Maybe I ate very nutritious food and I got out and got some sunlight and did a bunch of walking. Man, you're going to feel better. Come back the next day. And so that's kind of just a general idea without going into the weeds on all these things. You have to kind of see it from a macro perspective and not just the single day in time.
Yeah. That's a really good distinction there. With regards to sleep, since I know you're an expert in that, did your doctorate on it, and have done a lot in terms of sleep and recovery, what are some of the things, what are some of the ways you wrote an article I saw about improving your sleep without using melatonin? Let's talk a little bit about sleep.
Yeah. So if you track sleep, first of all, do not even look at the stages, the REM and deep sleep, and it's totally bogus.
Interesting.
Yeah, unfortunately, the only way you can assess those is through something called polysomnography, which uses EEG and eye movement. I actually have an article on our website, aim7.com. If you go to our blog, we're number 1 in Google. If you Google accuracy of wearables, I had a postdoc student. We looked at all the wearables, the key wearables on the market, and looked at all the peer-reviewed literature for the basic things that people want to know. And it just blew up. But like when it comes to like deep and REM sleep, you can't assess it with an Apple Watch or a Garmin or even your 8 sleep. It's not accurate. The literature does not prove it out. So what you want to look at
is there any way to really measure that then, or does it not even matter? Because people always talk about, oh yeah, you got to get at least whatever it is, an hour and a half of REM sleep and an hour and 15 minutes of deep sleep, or
there's not enough research. Like, so you sleep in 90 to 120 minute cycles that are a blend of REM and non-REM sleep. Earlier in the night, you have more non-REM sleep. And part of that is phase 3 or 4 deep sleep. Later in the evening, you have more REM sleep. Like you may have some lighter phases, but it's kind of like you're going up and down a staircase the entire time. It's very interesting how this works. You shouldn't even worry about it. What you should be focused on is 3 things: duration, onset, and consistency. And then we can talk about how to create the conditions for restful and fulfilling sleep. But you need 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night. The average American sleeping 6.5. Most of us overestimate our sleep by about a half an hour. If you do like the literature where people are doing like journals and then they actually put a device on them, they overestimate. There's a U-shaped relationship between, let's say you sleep less than 7 or more than 9 hours a night. You kind of want to be in that golden range for your risk of getting type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and even there was a twin study with over 21,000 twin pairs over 20 years, and they found the twin that slept less than 7 hours per night had a 24% increased risk of all-cause mortality.
Wow.
Yeah, it's that important. And if you're that person that's listening is like, yeah, I do great on 5 hours, I can almost guarantee you do not have the genetic polymorphism, for that. There's very few people that have that genetic SNP. You probably don't even know how good you could feel. Right. Then there's onset. When you go to bed matters. There was a great study that was done by MIT, Harvard, and the University of Colorado about 2 years ago now. They looked at over 600,000 people in the UK Biobank. They used genetic data from 23andMe. They used wearable data. They used journals. I mean, it was a very comprehensive study. They found that if you were to shift your sleep back 1 hour, so let's say you're going to bed at 1 a.m. and you shift it back to 12, there was a 23% reduction in risk of major depression.
Wow.
If you shifted it back 2 hours, there was almost a 40% reduction. And I'll tell you why that is in just a moment. Ideally, you should be in bed asleep before midnight. 10 to 11 is kind of the best time frame. Even if you're an evening type, most people are not genetically an evening type. Our behaviors make us an evening type. And then
Mm.
finally, you want to be consistent. You want to have a very consistent sleep routine 7 days a week. And you can flex about an hour. Otherwise, you're going to end up with something called social jet lag, which is going to basically give you all the same symptoms as having jet lag, plus an increased risk of cardiometabolic disease, weight gain, and depression. So there are two drivers for sleep. There's a homeostatic drive, which is kind of this biological drive where throughout the day, you wake up in the morning, you feel well rested, and then as the day goes on, you get more tired, and that's because of a buildup of something called adenosine, right? And if you drink caffeine, it blocks these adenosine receptors, and you artificially feel awake. Then there's something called a circadian process, which I'm sure many people are familiar with. And there's these things called zeitgebers or time givers that anchor your circadian clock. The most important one is light. And so, you want to get consistent and frequent sun exposure early in the morning and throughout the day. There was actually a paper that just came out like 6 weeks ago. And as you age, it gets very difficult to get a long, consistent night of sleep. You get fractured sleep in elderly populations. They found, however, if you got more natural light exposure during the middle of the day, people slept better throughout the night. As a matter of
Interesting.
fact, it was like 6 hours upon waking, that kind of in that window, you need to be outside and get some sunlight. So let's go back to that paper on sleep timing. They're trying these researchers like, why is it that if you go to bed earlier and wake up earlier, that people have less risk of depression? It all went back to sunlight exposure. People that go to bed earlier and wake up earlier get more natural sunlight exposure, which kicks off a cascade of hormonal and neurological events that help and boost your mood, reduce fatigue and decrease risk of depression. So sleep is when your body adapts to stress. It's when neuroplasticity occurs in your brain, your tissues are healing themselves. If there's anything that you need to nail, you need to nail sleep. If you want to unhinge somebody, like just sleep deprive them. They'll start hallucinating and going completely bananas.
Yep.
Everybody needs sleep. So I'd say that's like the first place to start with most people, and you will see tremendous changes across almost every area of your life.
I love that. And I'm also happy to hear 10 to 11 because that's exactly when I try to be in bed by 10, and hopefully I'm in a deep sleep by 10:30, and then I wake up and try to get my morning sunlight as much as possible as well, kind of first thing, maybe not first thing in the morning, you do a few things when you wake up, but as early as possible, trying to catch that sunrise. And I certainly feel a difference there. And then on the weekends, again, sometimes you go to sleep an hour later or something like that. But I've also seen if you push it much more than that, you'll start to have some fatigue and things of that nature. So, and obviously, I think we all know how, at least for me or anyone who's worn a sleep tracking wearable, the effects of alcohol on sleep.
Oh,
right? We've seen that. Yeah.
it's so funny. It's like people are like, so what did you learn using your wearable? Don't drink alcohol. I'm like, great. After you figured that out, what else did you learn? And it's like
Right.
crickets.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Yep. So let's talk a little bit about, so with AIM 7,
Mm-hmm.
tell me a little bit about what you've done there with wearables and how yours has in terms of the study that was done that you mentioned, where you guys were very accurate in terms of your wearables.
Mm-hmm.
What does AIM 7 do? What does it track? Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, so we don't create a wearable. We're the app that makes it all useful. So we connect to Apple Watch, Garmin, Fitbit, or etc. And what we do is it's not just another data layer where it's like, cool, I got charts and graphs. We actually tell you exactly what you need to do each day for exercise, sleep, and mental fitness, so you can build more adaptive capacity, so you can thrive under stress. So for instance, from an exercise perspective, we can tell you the precise type, intensity, and duration of exercise. So and it's all based off things you like to do. So let's say you like to do the elliptical, you like to jog, you like to do yoga, whatever. It'd be like, hey, today you should go out for a nice, easy run for 35 minutes and say in this specific heart rate zone.
Mm.
Or you're going to go lift weights. Great. AIM7 will make you a weightlifting program, and then we'll adjust it daily based off of how you're adapting to stress. Some days we're like, hey, today's not the best day for weights. You should go do this. From a mental fitness perspective, let's say we notice your stress. We'll actually push you a specific breath work tool to help you calm down, improve performance. Or we may have a mindfulness intervention for you or a gratitude intervention. And then from sleep and napping, we provide personalized recommendations there, all the way down to like, you can go in and be like, you know what, I got a sauna. I like drink caffeine. Like you have great high altitude coffee. You could, you plug all these things in, and then AIM7 is going to tell you when you should do what. So we're that personalized coach that's with you all the time. And we love all these devices. We just do all the hard work in the back end to make sure that you're using the right data in the correct way, tailored to you. This isn't a one size fits all deal.
Nice. Very cool. And some of those key metrics are the HRV and resting heart rate and things of that nature.
Yeah. So we combine, heart rate variability, resting heart rate. We look at a bunch of factors around your sleep. We look at a bunch of factors around your history of exercise. We also do something called a daily calibration. So I mentioned earlier that your perception of your wellness is really important. So first thing in the morning, you go into the app, you get a score, what we call the A7 score, and then you can calibrate. And it takes 20 seconds. And we ask very specific questions about a few things. And then your score is adjusted to match how your body, mind, and body are adapting to stress. And then you get really precise recommendations.
Very cool. Very, very cool. I would like to go back to some of the other pillars real quick, if you don't mind, as well.
Yeah.
You mentioned sleep, and then there were some other ones about like your mental
Mental
well-being. Yeah.
Yeah. So mental fitness is let me give you a story to kind of articulate this to help bring it home a little bit. There's a myth that the best in the world do not experience uncomfortable thoughts and feelings under pressure. And that's totally not true. The greatest Olympic cyclist of all time, his name is Sir Chris Hoy, and he won 6 Olympic gold medals. And he was asked in an interview what it was like to race in an Olympic finals. And he said it felt like he was going to the gallows. He was getting executed. Now, this isn't just anybody. This is the greatest Olympic cyclist of all time. And what you want in crucible situations is you want to be able to have control of your attention. Because if you have control of your attention and you're open to these uncomfortable thoughts, emotions, and feelings, then you can shift your attention and take action. So what Chris said after that was, but then I would shift my attention to my grip on the steering wheel, my feet in the clips, my butt in the seat, and then I would take action. So we define mental fitness as the ability to be consciously present and process information without bias. This empowers you to respond quickly and rationally to changing circumstances through committed actions anchored in your training and your values. So when you're under pressure, what you want is control of your attention. My friend Dr. Peter Haberl says attention is the currency of performance. So whether it's a conversation with your child or your spouse or a coworker, think of your biggest failures in those conversations. It's typically when you react out of your emotions and not out of your values. And then you're like, that's not me. That was dumb. I wish I could get those words back, but you can't, right? Or you're trying to negotiate something, or you're in a high pressure situation for work, and you what I learned working with the best in the world is you're either trained or you're untrained. And, we used to say you don't rise to the level of your expectations, you fall to the level of your training. And so you can be trained, but then in those difficult moments, are you mentally fit enough to be able to access that training and make the right decision at the right time? And so there's ways that you can, train mental fitness. One specific tool is mindfulness. Mindfulness is not this mystical thing. You're training attentional awareness. You're training your mind to be aware of the moment and where your head is. And mindfulness has great implications for things like anxiety and burnout and all this kind of stuff. But when you train mindfulness, you're learning how to control your attention and notice when your mind is elsewhere and how to bring it back to the present moment so then you can do what? Take action eventually. And so that's one way, you can improve mental fitness, but you kind of understand the bigger picture here.
Yeah, yeah. I'm curious. So I bet with athletes, especially some of these younger athletes, right, that may not be used to some of these mindfulness concepts and things of that nature, I'm sure they've gotten tremendous benefits out of it. I wonder, what are some of the ways that people, so yeah, it's like even someone listening right now, they're like, okay, that sounds amazing in concept, but how do I build that muscle?
Yeah. So training with the mindfulness tool. So mindfulness is really simple. You can, so let me go back to one thing. How does this build more stress resilience, ability for adaptive capacity? If you're a ruminator, meaning like negative thought comes into your mind, you dwell on it, what happens? The stress systems ramp up. Now you're draining that adaptation fuel. And then when you go work out, all of a sudden you're running on empty. Where if you're noticing where your mind is, you can shift your thoughts to either using a tool to regulate your arousal or to shift it to something that's more pleasant, right? Um,
Yeah.
so training mindfulness is pretty simple. People can use the breath. You're basically honing in on a physical sensation. I like to do mindful walking. So I
Hmm.
just go on a walk, and the last usually 10 minutes, I will just focus on my feet rolling over the ground. It's really hard because you're distracted by all sorts of stuff. And that's okay, because when your mind drifts off, the ability to bring it back, that's when the plastic changes occur in your brain. You can do mindful eating. It's just being present in the moment with some type of physical sensation. Breath work is another way to train mental fitness. Breath work can be used as a tool to regulate acute stress. But if you think about it, when you do breath work, you're also having to be mindful of the cadence. So it's kind of a 2 for 1. Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
Journaling, gratitude journaling improves positive mental affect. It helps you reframe life's, difficult situations in a more positive light. It helps with positively adapting to stress. There's a lot of different tools that are available for mental fitness. So I've actually found that younger athletes get this because guess what? They're worried about stuff too.
Hmm. Yeah. I just think they may not have meditated or heard of the benefits of meditation or
Yeah.
learned a specific breathing technique. Do you have a favorite kind of breathing technique, by the way?
I personally prefer like the parasympathetic breath tools where it's kind of like double exhaled inhales. Sometimes I'll do that. Sometimes I do it right after my workout in the car ride home, just to like to kick my parasympathetic nervous system back into action to kind of help me recover. I'll also do like physiological sides, like double inhale exhales to kind of help ramp up the parasympathetic nervous system. You know, one of my Lucas Rockwood, I really like. He's got coffee, whiskey, and what's the third one? I can't remember. He has these paradigms. So coffee is like in the morning you do like quick inhale exhales to kind of ramp up the sympathetic nervous system. Whiskey breath is like the long exhales. You're breathing like 4 or 5 times a minute. And I think maybe it's water is kind of like just box breathing. You can do it in the middle of the day to increase focus. So, it really depends on what you want to do, but most of them really shift you into this parasympathetic state, which is where you want to spend most of your day.
Yeah, yeah. And I could see that definitely being useful for athletes in specific situations as well. Now, I think also a lot of what we mentioned about mental health and mental resiliency. First of all, I think there's an old saying that I heard that I love. It basically just goes, "Sleep is the boss of you." Right. So going back to
Mm.
sleep, you get bad sleep, you're just going to be, you're not going to be operating at your best, mentally or physically. Right. So we kind of covered that. I think some of the other things are the foods that you put in your body, right? The
Yes.
nutrition that you're putting in. So have you seen that? Maybe someone with the younger athletes getting their nutrition dialed in could probably be a huge thing, right?
Oh, I used to work with athletes going to the NFL Combine, and I've trained a few that, like, one guy in particular had one of the, if you look by weight, he had one of the best combine performances in the history of the combine, 256 pounds. It was Bud Dupree, got drafted in the first round. I ran a 4.59 at 200, was it 53 pounds? Verticaled 42 inches, I believe, broad jumped. It was crazy, insane performance. He was a freak athlete. We kind of peaked him for the moment, but we had blood work done. I had a dietitian working with him, and he just showed up just shredded and crushing it. Worked at another athlete that I think caught 9 balls his senior year at Mississippi State. He showed up for his pro day and was just like, it was this crazy transformation in like 3 months, and ended up playing 3 or 4 years in the league because he ran a 4.38 and everybody's like, who is this guy, right? Nutrition is critically important. You don't want the body to be in a chronic state of inflammation. And if you're eating a bunch of ultra processed foods, your body's in a chronic state of inflammation. So what's happening is, instead of being able to use some of that adaptation fuel to adapt to things like maybe psychological stress or physical, like exercise stress, it's being used to try to dampen down this low grade fever of stress that's going on. And so you're getting more and more maladaptive. There's some really interesting papers coming out about, the cost of eating ultra processed foods all the time, not monetary, but physiological cost. So, I'm not here to espouse like a carnivore diet or this diet, but generally speaking, the most researched diet out there is the Mediterranean diet. And the reason I think researchers look at this a lot is because it's kind of just balanced. Multicolored fruits and vegetables, healthy fats, fatty fish. You're eating, fruits and vegetables. You're eating, grains, and it's just like, most of it is not processed, single source ingredients. And when you kind of look at that versus like these ultra processed diets, lower systemic inflammation, people live longer, they're healthier, less incidence of mental illness. It's just, yeah, I don't want to, we don't want to get into like the carb fat ratios and all this kind of stuff. You just need to eat a diverse diet that creates a healthy internal environment so you can adapt to stress. Everybody's got food preferences. I'm not saying you shouldn't eat pizza every once in a while or anything like that. It's just 90% of your diet should be healthy foods that come from the ground or something like that, fished out of the ocean or whatever.
Yep. Totally agree. Dr. Erik, I know we only got a couple minutes left. I want to try to leave some of our listeners with, because most of the listeners are obviously not professional athletes,
Sure.
more kind of like your average Joe, maybe your weekend warrior, a lot of people in their 40s and 50s listening that want to, really interested in longevity, really interested in improving their kind of strength and resilience, both physical and mental. What is some advice you would have for those people, and how can they, and obviously, you have your AIM 7 program in your app, and maybe they can utilize that in some way as well.
Yeah, I mean, from an exercise perspective, because a lot of people are like, well, tell me how you train the best in the world, right? It's a little bit different because when I trained Veronica for a 200-meter sprint or a 100-meter sprint, y'all would be shocked. We may run 6 sprints in an entire session. But those, you run a 100-meter sprint at 95% max velocity, you're going to be resting for 15 to 18 minutes. For an adult, I think what's missing is like, number one, the literature is very clear. If you get 150 to 300 minutes of heart rate elevated exercise per week, and you do 2 total body strengthening sessions, this is the minimum, you lower your risk of all-cause mortality by 41 to 47%. I don't think with all the zone 2 craziness, zone 2 is great, right? Awesome. People are getting enough cardiovascular exercise. I think people that are exercising, what they're not getting is true resistance training that causes an adaptation. Nothing against the communal benefits of some of these boot camp classes, but the intensity of the resistance training is not high enough to, once you kind of, okay, let me just say this. If you're doing nothing and then you start doing anything for about the first 9 months, your body's going to adapt and get great results. Most of those adaptations are neurological to begin with. Then
Mm.
around month 9 through 12, people start plateauing. And sometimes they just look like a smaller version of their original self. I'm
Mm.
43. I'm not doing anything crazy. I resistance train 3 times a week for about an hour. What most people lack in their training is true intensity. You actually need to lift. Now, if you're beginning, it could be body weight. Bands are fine, but at some point you're going to have to use weights, and then you're going to have to, kind of be in like 2 to 3 reps, good solid reps of failure. So I'm not saying do anything dangerous, but you can use machines, have great form, and push yourself. You're like, you know what? Oh my gosh, I've only got like 2 reps left. That's it. But most people don't really know how far that is. I just did a DEXA scan just recently. I'm actually going to put a podcast out about this. In over a 6-month period of time, I gained 4.5 pounds of muscle at 43 years old. And I'm not on like super physiological doses of testosterone and or anything like that. I just added more intensity to my sessions. And
Mm-hmm.
you can still add muscle, and muscle is a longevity organ, right? So I think one of the things that most people are missing is true intensity in their training. And so in our app, we use something called reps in reserve. We actually try to help people understand how many reps do I have left before mechanical failure? And you need to stay, 3 to 4 reps safely before that point. There is no need. There was actually a great paper that came out. There is no need to go to absolute volitional fatigue. It's too dangerous for most of us. You're gonna eventually probably rupture something or collapse with a bar on your back, and you don't want that. But you've got to use some intensity if you want to maintain muscle over the long run, or actually add some muscle.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And it also, in order to train with intensity, you got to do all the other things we spoke about in this episode, like get good nutrition, get the sleep, right? Because,
Yes.
again, going back to the article you wrote too, I'm also in disagreement with people who are like, I'm going to set the alarm and wake myself up an hour early
Oh,
to
you're
get
talking
in
about
the,
the Inc. article, aren't you?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, where it's like,
People
again,
got
it's like,
mad.
you're,
Sorry.
I bet.
Yeah,
Yeah,
people got a
yeah. So
little upset about
that's
that.
the article I was referring to. And I think, yeah, I bet they did, because that whole wake up and grind is I think sacrificing sleep is the wrong answer to doing that. I think we covered how important sleep is, but when you get the right sleep, making it a priority to do the strength training as well. So I love everything you're doing. Really appreciate everything you're putting out here in the world. Where can people follow you, learn more, sign up for AIM7 if they're interested?
Yeah, I appreciate that. aim7.com, AIM7.com. You can get a free trial there. And then I would point people to my newsletter. I'll give you a link for that. It's called Adaptation, and it's all about how to build more adaptive capacity. Every Friday, I send out an email with just 3 tips for mind, body, and recovery on how to build more adaptive capacity. And that's something I've really been investing a lot of time in. It seemed to be making a tremendous impact. So if you really want some curated knowledge and information, I would say check that out. I'll give you a link for that to put in your show notes.
Amazing, amazing. And you've got your podcast as well, right? The Blueprint.
Yeah, the blueprint, it's basically like Huberman Light. So we distill these cutting edge science things down in like 15 to 20-minute segments. And yeah, if you're on my newsletter, you'll get we do it 3 times a week. We actually bring on some of the same guests, and we just get right to the tactical stuff because most people are busy and they don't have time for 2 hours, and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, the blueprint and any social media at Erik Korem.
I love that. I love that description of a Huberman Light, because and getting things in 20, 30 minutes, because as good as Huberman sounds, I don't know that I've ever been able to finish an entire podcast episode of his, and all the little nitty gritty kind of to many people like myself meaningless details for 3 hours, and you're just like, okay, get to the point. What do I do here? What does this mean? So yeah, that sounds awesome.
We're trying to
Dr.
make it
Erik, thank you so
accessible.
much. Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much for joining us. I highly encourage people to check out your Blueprint podcast, check out AIM7 and your newsletter, and keep doing what you're doing. Really appreciate you and everything you're doing in the health community.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to come on the show today.
Thank you. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, can you please leave us a rating or review and subscribe? I've realized that while we have actually increased our downloads a lot, we're actually getting a lot of downloads, which I'm really happy about. We actually have very few ratings. And I realized that I've never asked people really to rate much. So I'm asking you now if you could please rate and review and subscribe. And if you enjoyed the episode, please forward it along to anyone that you think will get value out of this. Also, if you haven't checked out our line of products at buypeakperformance.com, you get 20% off your first order. That's www.buypeakperformance.com. We have some incredible products, including our organic high-altitude coffee. If you don't know this, coffee is one of the most heavily sprayed with pesticides out of any crop. So it's really important that you drink organic coffee. We've gone above and beyond to source what we believe is the highest quality and healthiest organic coffee in the world. We're also famous for our organic green superfood powder. You can get 20% off of that as well at buypeakperformance.com. We also have an organic vegan and paleo plant protein. See, most of the vegan proteins out there are using brown rice protein, which is really not a good source of protein, and it's also a grain. And if you're paleo, you know that grains tend to cause inflammation in some cases for some people. And so we wanted to make one that was paleo friendly and vegan and organic. We made an amazing amino acid profile, so it's really one of the best plant proteins for muscle building. So you can check out Peak Performance Organic Plant Protein. You can find that on our website. Of course, all our products are on Amazon as well. So thanks again. And again, please, if you enjoyed the episode, please forward it along to someone who you feel can get value out of it. And please leave us a rating, review, and subscribe. Thank you.